Hello, everybody, and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar. It's my great pleasure to introduce today Paul Thompson. And it's very interesting because Paul has a background that many people will not expect in information retrieval. So I think that his talk is going to be very interesting because he can tell you of some of these techniques can be applied in the context of security. Paul received his PhD from University of California at Berkeley, and he's currently a research professor at Dartmouth. And he was previously associated with Drexel University and also with West Publishing Company. So it's my great pleasure to have him.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about semantic attacks and security. And I'll go into some of the research background for this project, which began 4.5 years ago at the Institute for Security Technology Studies at Dartmouth College. And the project, in a formal sense, ended about 2 years ago, but as I'll go into in some of this talk, there are various threads of it that are being continued. I'll talk about the relation of this project to detecting deception or counter-deception, and look at an example, a prototype that we built towards the end of this project, looking at detecting misinformation in news stories, and then moving ahead to some of the more future directions this work may take. About a little over a year ago, I was involved with a workshop at the Air Force Research Lab where they were looking at a new program of research called the Commander's Predictive Environment. And in particular, we were interested there in looking at deception detection again. And then just last summer, I took part in a National Science Foundation workshop where the workshop was focused on detecting deception in language. And this also turned out to be part of a broader series of workshops of looking at overall security evaluations, where they're concerned with background investigations, interviews, and interrogations. And it was anticipated there will be more funding in this area as well. So much of the work on deception detection has been done by psychologists or communications researchers. And in particular, the Air Force has funded work by Burgoon and other psychologists at the University of Arizona. And initially, this work was looking at detecting deception in face-to-face communication. But gradually, over the years, it sort of evolved into looking at detecting deception in computer-mediated communication. And then it started to overlap with semantic attacks or semantic hacking project that I was working on. So, for example, one of the things that some of the communication theorists claim is that just in everyday face-to-face conversation among people, over 50% of this communication is in some way deceptive, to varying degrees. So one of the issues here is identification of linguistic cues of deception. So say you're looking at computer-mediated communication, what kind of cues in the text could you pick up which is indicative of deception? This has also sometimes been called linguistic forensics, and an example of this would be authorship attribution, based on statistical analysis of writers' styles. And some of this work goes back quite a few years. Statisticians, Mosteller and Wallace back in the 1960s did work on attributing the authorship of the Federalist Papers written before the U.S. Constitution was adopted. Some were by known authors, but others, they weren't sure if it was Madison or Hamilton had written various of them. So there are also other government programs, such as the ACQUAINT program, Advanced Question Answering for Intelligence, where deception detection might also play a role. And in some of the sort of long-range planning for that program, they talked about the problem of detecting contradiction in various text on the same topic as something that you would need in order to do question answering properly. Another government program was NIMD, or Novel Intelligence and Massive Data, where I'll talk a little bit later in this talk about an example related to intelligence analysis with deception detection. And another area of research is deception among autonomous agents. And as I'll go into a little more shortly, there was a report by Martin Libicki written in 1994, which first developed the taxonomy of talking about computer security incidents or attacks as being physical, syntactic, or semantic. And he was largely concerned with the problem of autonomous agents, say a sensor network system in the battlefield that was being fed misinformation by an adversary. Also, Professor Eugene Santos, who recently came to Dartmouth from the University of Connecticut, has similarly been involved in research on autonomous agents and deception detection. In related areas, in some natural language processing in text, there's been a recent interest in detecting sentiment or emotion or affect in text. Other researchers have been looking at detecting emotion in speech, or there are some current Homeland Security border security initiatives that are looking at video or trying to fuse information from both audio and video sources, say like at a customs agent or something like that, that you could, through surveillance, provide the agent some real-time indications that maybe there's some deception based on audio or video analysis. And as I mentioned with the security evaluations program, one of the parties that's interested in that is the Defense Polygraph Institute. So as some of the traditional physiological detection of deception in like lie detectors has been called into question by some studies. They're interested in trying to move beyond that, or to look at situations, say interrogations in a battle setting where you can't strap on all the equipment or something like that. So the particular project that I'm mostly focusing on was called the Semantic Hacking Project. This was work that I was involved with at the Institute for Security Technology Studies at Dartmouth College from 2001 through 2003. Other people working on the project included Professor George Sabenko and his doctoral student, Anurita Gianni. This work was funded by the National Institute of Justice, and unlike the earlier work I mentioned by Libicki, which was more concerned with battle sort of settings, our focus was on computer security. So as I mentioned in his report, The Mesh and the Net, Speculations on Armed Conflict in an Age of Free Silicon, Libicki divided attacks into these types of physical, syntactic, and semantic. And because we were more concerned with, say, something like an end user on the web being misled by misinformation, we started calling what we were doing cognitive hacking or cognitive attacks instead of semantic. And partly the motivation for that was that people in computer science theory, were talking about the semantics of a computer system and violations of that semantics, and we didn't want to confuse what we were doing with that. So many of our papers talk about cognitive hacking or cognitive attacks. But in a broader sense, you can look at this as really perception management. And so this has been around for a long time. I mean, thousands of years, not just since computers